Thanks, folks, for joining me for this session on creating beautiful reports with the PSHTML module. My name is Jess Pomfret, and before we get started, we want to say a big thank you to our sponsors. Hopefully you've been spending some time with them in the expo hall? Sponsor room, snack location. Let them know that you appreciate them being here. Talk to them about their products. Get some free stuff. This conference is obviously put together by the organizers, but it couldn't be possible without these folks. Who am I? This is me. My name's Jess Pomfret. My pronouns are she and her. I am a data platform engineer. I work for Data Masterminds. And I'm also an open source contributor, which is where most of the PowerShell stuff, which is what got me into PowerShell and the community type stuff. I'm passionate about SQL Server, PowerShell, and proper football. I've got a slightly strange accent because although I am English, I lived in America for 15 years and it completely ruined my accent. So it's all good. I'm a Microsoft MVP, both for the PowerShell, Azure space, and data platform. And the most important thing on this slide is if you have a question about this, or you want to chat about data or DBA tools or football or whatever, you can find me on LinkedIn or you can email me. Now, this session, you might think, why do we even need this session? Because built into PowerShell, we can make reports, right? Get process, convert to HTML, out file. Done. A report from PowerShell to HTML, right? Nice. Thank you. Session over. Everyone out. The key for this session is the beautiful part, right? That is super ugly. It is literally just a table of data. There's no real headings. There's no real formatting. If I just threw that on the internet, it's probably not going to do very well. So we are going to look at how we can improve that with PSHTML, which is a community module. It was started and mostly written by Stefan. It is cross-platform, as PowerShell is. And it is also a DSL, domain-specific language, right? And what that means is it's specialized to a particular application domain rather than being a general language like PowerShell. And it provides a higher level of abstraction, and you'll see that in our demos and our examples today. There's another DSL, very popular, already on this slide, HTML, right? The way HTML written is also considered a domain-specific language. So some quick examples of how this works. Oh, I missed the bottom bit. It renders HTML as PowerShell, using PowerShell. That's the important part, right? Basically, we're going to write PowerShell with our PSHTML module, and it's going to render it as HTML that will display as beautiful reports, web apps, whatever. So this is PowerShell. You can tell it's PowerShell, but it looks a bit different, right? We haven't got that verb-noun naming format because we're using a DSL. So H1 is our function, and then we're going to pass in some content. And what that's going to do is it's going to create the heading 1 tags with the content that we've passed in. We can do the same thing for a paragraph. Thank you, clicker. Paragraph, content, this is a paragraph. There you go, a HTML paragraph. Where this gets more exciting is when you can do stuff with PowerShell, such as converting a PowerShell object to a table. So convert to PSHTML table, and you'll notice that some of the functions are written in a way we feel is more PowerShell-y. I can just take a data object, and you get all of the tags to make a HTML table, right? Now it goes on for miles because my object was quite long, but you can see it creates the table, it creates the head row, the heading row, the cell labels basically for the rows, for the columns, and then it will go on and list the data. So in this way, we can write HTML by really only knowing PowerShell and a bit about it, right? We don't have to be, I don't have to be able to write HTML code. I can write PowerShell code and then just generate it. What's super cool is we get to use useful PowerShell features to make creating the HTML easier. So things like conditionals, loops, and switches, we can decide based on certain conditions whether we're going to output that HTML or not, right? Like I only want to display all of the failed jobs if there were failed jobs. Otherwise, don't give me a table with nothing. For loops, you could create like a for each loop over an object, and for each item in the object, you could create a bullet point, right? You don't have to manually type those all out. You can use the PowerShell magic to do that for you. As far as what HTML we can generate, the list is quite long, but headings, lists, forms, tables, charts, all these things can now be accomplished with PSHTML, which is pretty neat. And most of this session will be demos. This GitHub repo already has all the content out there. It's also built in a dev container, which I hear is pretty neat. And you should check out that session from me and Rob tomorrow on dev containers and why that makes it so great. But we're going to dive in there. I'll show that link again in a second. Neat. Okay. Can everyone read that at the back? Is that okay? Oh, because you have an extra TV. Neat. All right. Let's prove the ugly reports first, right? So get process, convert to HTML, output a file. I can open that file, and it looks like HTML, right? I can format it. And there you go. I've got my doc type. I've got some HTML. I don't really know HTML that well, so this is HTML. There's my header. There's my body. And then I've got... It's ugly even in the code, right? But I can do open preview, and you can see HTML. Beautiful. Or the opposite of that.
HTML.
Yeah. Just as a quick aside, this is all running in the dev container. You can tell that down here. I've got my dev container. And I have all the things I need to do this demo within here. So beforehand, we were having some problems with my internet connection. I could have downloaded this repo on anyone else's laptop and opened it and done it, right? Because it's all contained, which is why it's magic. But this preview is an extension from VS Code to be able to preview HTML files within my dev container. Neat. But it's not beautiful. So we need PSHTML. And we'll import that module, and we'll take a look at the get command. Now, as we mentioned, some of the functions do look like you'd expect, right? Some of them are written in the verb-noun way, but some of the other ones are not. For example, sup. I have literally no idea what that does in HTML, but it sounds cool. So this is the aliases, right? Or they're actually not even aliases. The functions are named in a way that this DSL will work. But you can see that there are tons of different parts of HTML you can create. Scripts, progress, strong, subs, whatever. So we can create a simple heading. H1 content, hi PSConf, and it just creates just the tags, right? Just the tags that you need to create that HTML. We can also create a simple paragraph. Again, like we saw on the slides, it just creates a straight, like a plain paragraph. But what we can do is we can combine this to create a HTML page, right? So here I'm setting this code to a variable HTML, and I'm basically using these functions. So this is a function that generates a HTML tag, which is basically the outer tag you need for your page. I then could create a head with my title, and then a body with a heading and a paragraph. We'll do that. And then we'll just output that HTML to a page called simple page. It looks like this. If we use the VS Code formatter, so that was Shift-Alt-F, or I could have done the command palette format document, it'll make it look like HTML. And if I go to the command palette and I do open preview, a web page from PowerShell code in just a few lines, right? Nice. So that's like the simplest kind of web page you could create with PSHTML. But we're at PSConfEU. We want to see better, more realistic examples. And to be fair, I said I didn't use AI. I did use AI, but it's already done. We don't have to depend on it working right now. But in this case, we can use PSHTML to create tables, right? And I wrote $data equals, and then Copilot was like, here you go. And it's 100% correct. It created me a PS custom object. I gave it no prompts. That's literally all I wrote. And it said, Jess is age 30, lives in the UK. Rob, age 31, lives in the UK. And Chrissy, age 29, lives in the UK. But hey, it knew the three of us were friends and we wanted to be in this data. Copilot. It's not always perfect. But anyway, I've got now my object of data stored in my variable, and I can convert to PSHTML table, passing in that object out file to a file called table. There it is. So again, I've not got my HTML tags because I've just outputted a table, but I can preview this and you'll see it looks like a table, right? You can see there are cells. It's not formatted. It's just a plain table. But we can take this one step further and we can add style, which in HTML is always done with CSS, right? I don't know CSS very well, and I don't really have any style. So we can go to this website, and it will help us style tables. And you can do divs or tables. I realize there's like a discussion out there on which is the best way. We're going for tables for now, but you can basically choose any of these templates that are already styled for you. It will look like this. This is the HTML, which we don't need because we're going to create this. But this is the CSS code to style the table in that way. Why you would want the header at the bottom, I'm not sure, but this person did. So what we can do is we can take the CSS and save it in a variable. This one is called pale blue rose. So basically I need to add the class pale blue rose to the table that I want to be formatted in this way. And I'll create the CSS code, and then I'll create my HTML code. Looks pretty similar to the last example, and again, we're saving it to a variable. HTML head style, and within the style tags, I'm going to insert that CSS code. Then I'm going to say this is a beautiful table report. You can see I'm using some PowerShell within it, right? I'm just going to say get today's date and put it in there, and then convert to PSHTML, the data, add the table class. I'm going to put this back onto the table HTML file, which now looks like this. You can see within the style tags, we've got our table.paleBlueRose, which is the class, and all the stuff we need to make it beautiful. If we scroll down, you can see I've then got the body, the table. This is basically what that parameter added. It gave the table a class so we can format it. And if we preview it, bam, it looks a bit better already, right? We've got some styles, we've got some different colored rows. Things are looking better. And you can get data from anywhere, any PS object, right? Which I'm quite excited for because I usually try and do like a data DBA tool session because data's cool. So I've snuck that into the demo too. I've got a SQL instance actually running within my dev container also. There's a database on it, and I'm going to get some data. Get me the top 10 rows from the authors table. That's all this is doing. I'm going to set up those variables, and I'm going to use invoke DBA query, which lets you run any SQL query against a database. What that did is it did exactly what I said it was going to, right? It got me the top 10 authors. Those are in my results. So let's edit our HTML from before. We had this already, right? The data from Copilot's PS object. And now I'm going to add another heading, data from SQL Server, and I'm going to pass in the results, both with the pale blue rose class. Let's go to table. And you can see it's getting longer. We're up to 207 lines. But here you can see the second table has been added with my data from SQL Server. Let's preview that. And you can see I've got 2 tables on there now. And again, it's not perfect, right? I would rather have my phone numbers in a full line rather than being kind of squished together. But that's all in the CSS and how you design that, which I'm not an expert at. Any questions on tables and simple HTML reports? Nice. All right, so the cool stuff, right? Conditional logic, stuff within PowerShell that we can use to make this better. I've got the same data from before and some CSS. This time my CSS, I've got 2 styles. I've got pale blue rose, but I've also got red table. So what I can do, and this is not a great real world example, but you could do this based on any kind of result right in your code. And I'm going to say, based on a random number, give me either pale blue rose or red table. And then when I output this, it says, I'm going to use the class pale blue rose. And if I run that over and over again, I'm going to get different results. If we look at the HTML we're designing here, I've got HTML head. I've added a meta tag, which this is going to refresh the page every second just to show the demo. And then I've injected the CSS, and I've got 1 heading, 1 table, and the table class is going to be whatever that switch set it to be. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come here. Am I going to grab this? Not cut, just copy. If we go over here and we open this in the browser, some of the more complicated things don't work. Oh, it's called Table 2. In the preview extension within VS Code. So we'll open this outside of the container. And if I now basically set the location to my repo, and then I'm going to say, oh, that's even harder to read. I made it a light theme thinking it would be easier to read, and it's worse. Okay, maybe we'll go back to the other one. But anyway, what this is doing is it's just running the script over and over again, and sometimes it creates a red table, and sometimes it creates a blue table. Now, I could use this in the real world for if things look bad, I could make them red, and if things look fine, I can make them blue, right? But this is just an example of how you can use PowerShell to basically dynamically style your tables, which I think is neat. Sorry. All right. Graphs. So just recently, PSHTML in the recent version, introduced support for graphs. And there's a few things we have to do to be able to use these. We need a script tag with a reference to the chart.js library. We need a canvas with a specific ID. We need some data for our chart. And then we need a chart object which combines the data and the canvas. So here you go. I'm building up my HTML page again. Here's step 1. I need to include that library. And you can do that with the script function, pointing it towards a source of type JavaScript. I've added a canvas with a specific ID. And then I've got my script content, which is basically using some PSHTML functions to create data and create labels, and then combine them as a bar chart. If I smush this together, I can run this, and it creates a graphs page. And as I mentioned, not everything works within that preview extension, so I'll open it here, and I'll zoom in. You can see that this has been created based off the data I provided. Again, just a static data set, but it's interactive because it's using that JavaScript library, and I believe you can even turn things on and off for the graphs, which is quite cool. This is a bar graph, very informative. There are other types of graphs you can add in, donuts, pies, lines, whatever. Basically, as long as you do these 4 things, you can create those JavaScript graphs. We'll see those again in a second. We can also create forms. So I don't know JavaScript either. This session is about PowerShell, which I know, and then a bunch of languages I don't know. So I've depended on Copilot to add in some of the knowledge, which is where GitHub Copilot is really useful, right? Because I can say, how do I do this in JavaScript? And then I can start working from that example to what I actually want. And for this example, I want to hit an API called CatFactNinja, and I want to get some facts. And then I want to show them in my HTML form. So that's the JavaScript. We'll save that in a variable. And the PSHTML to create this, I'm going to create my head. I've got my script, basically call the API, put it somewhere on the page. And then I've got my body, I've got a heading, and I've got a form. So this is still all PowerShell. I'm going to define 2 inputs, one being a text box called fact, and one being a submit button. And then I've got an empty div here called catFact, which is where the results will be injected into. If I run this, we'll basically create a forms HTML page. And if we come here, we've got, let's get a catFact. Now, within the JavaScript, I told it I wanted to be able to limit the number of facts I got or get 10, which is the default. So if I do nothing, I get 10 facts. If I put in a number, I get that number of facts. And we can all learn today that a group of cats is called a clouder. So if you didn't learn any PSHTML, you at least learned this valuable fact, okay? Great. Now, obviously, this is a really simple form. But you could do all kinds of things with that submit button, right? So my session last year was about PowerShell functions. You could easily call that submit button could call an API on your PowerShell function and do all kinds of things, build some infrastructure, cause some chaos, whatever. But this is just a really cool way of making like a web front end from PowerShell. So those are kind of some of the cool elements that you can have, and some examples on how to use them. Any questions at this point? We're saving them for the defined question and answer section. I like it. Okay. Now, what I always like in sessions is I want to know like real world examples of why I need to know this and what I could actually do with it, right? And this is something that I use in my day job all the time, and that is to use PSHTML and PowerShell to create a nice morning checks report for me. And I set this up to email me every morning. So when I get to my laptop, I've got my coffee, I can check all the things I need to check without having to log into every client's system and make sure their databases are online or their jobs haven't failed. But for this example, I've got the email stuff commented out because I'm just going to create the web form, the web page basically that you would send as a HTML email. So let's again use DBA tools, get DBA database from an instance. This is just going to get information about my databases. And if I inspect that, you can see it basically returns some information. The name of a database, this one's broken. It's named BrokenDB. The status, compatibility level, whatever. Things you might care about. And you can do this with any data. If you are not a database administrator, you probably don't care about the databases, but perhaps you care about certain services running on certain machines. You can do get service, list the services, get their state, and you can create a report every morning that tells you all the services you expect to be online are. I've got some requirements here that backups should be within 1 day. Databases should all be owned by the user SA, and the state should be normal. So I'll set those. I've got a couple of variables for different charts here, as you saw in the previous example. And then I've got my HTML. Now this is getting a bit longer, right? Because I'm creating a whole morning checks report. In my head, I've got my charts library, and then I've added Bootstrap, which is a free open source CSS framework that helps make responsive web pages beautiful more easily, because we already know that style isn't my thing. So I've got my body, and then I'm going to set up a heading just saying when we ran the morning checks. I've got a section of charts. So using these classes are all from that Bootstrap module. So you can go on their documentation and say, I want to make 3 columns of charts. Like, how do I lay that out? And you do that like this. Basically, then I've got 3 canvases, which is where my charts are going to be injected with the different IDs. And then the content for the charts. So I'm going to get databases, and I'm going to get the compatibility level of the databases. I'm going to put that into a pie chart. I'm going to get the size of the databases and make that into a bar chart. And I'm going to get the status and make that into a donut chart, just to show off 3 different chart types. Then I'll move on to like the second section, which you'll see in a second, and I'm going to define some tables. And in these, I'm basically saying, here's the heading, and then here's the data. And I'm using the conditional within PowerShell to say, if I've got things that meet this, as in there are databases that haven't had a backup in the last 24 hours, output the databases that haven't had a backup. If not, just say all databases are backed up, we're good to go. Same for database owner, same for database status. And if I run this, I'll actually collapse this because that'll make it easier. Pop over here again. We've got a morning checks report, and you can see it looks like this. And as I zoom in, you can see that it's responsive, right? It's the 3 graphs nicely next to each other, and I can hover over this. This is all configurable. I can turn things on and off. It looks pretty nice. And then my tables, again, databases that haven't had backups, owners, where the owner is an SA. And this is from one PowerShell object, and I'm just pulling out the information I care about. So which SQL instance, what's the name, who's the owner? Well, it should be SA, and it's actually SQL admin. So these are things that I need to fix today. Databases where the status isn't normal, this one's offline. It's broken, it's no good. So what we can do, and what I often do in my day job, is I'll go and I'll fix whatever the problem is, right? So in this case, I'm just going to set the state back to online and rerun the report. And when we do that, we can refresh this. Did it come back online? I didn't actually retrieve the data from the database. Smart. Okay. There we go. So now they're all normal, right? Everything's green up there. And you can see, because I said only output the table, if there are problems, it just says the databases are online. We checked. We're good here. Ace. This is like one of the most valuable things I've probably put into place at several clients, because we send this email to their IT teams and to me and my team, and we can immediately say like, hey, something happened last night at 3:00. The error logs have blown up and 4 jobs have failed. And before I've logged on to all of the different systems, you can see that just in a snapshot. Get it on your phone, get it in Slack, wherever. Super cool. The last piece I want to show is a web app, right? So with Azure static web apps, you can create static web pages of just HTML files. So all of the things we've created today can just go onto the web and be a web page. Again, I've got my head set up, pulling in the Bootstrap libraries and the chart libraries. And then I'm going to create a header that says this is my PSConf presentation. Again, last updated date. I've got an image using the image function. And then I'm going to have, what I was supposed to do was remove these lines. And Copilot was supposed to help us. See, sometimes it just doesn't want to play. Copilot, come on, man. It says it's ready. So this is GitHub Copilot within VS Code, right? And so you can have chats with it now also. So it says basically some stuff about it. We can say, yeah, and oh, that was not. I thought it just would put it in there. Okay, we'll just grab that. Actually, what we'll do is we'll just undo the fact that I deleted it. Okay, so it said this presentation in my practice run, it says this presentation is using PSHTML to create a web app, whatever. And I said also, let's have an interesting fact about octopuses. Did you know that they have 3 hearts and blue blood? Another interesting fact for the day. And then I've got a heading saying these are all the things we've learned today. I've got like a static list of links to the documentation. And then I've got a list of items built based on the things that we've created, right? So all of the files within the web folder, excluding this one, sort them into order, and then for each one, we're going to create a bullet point. And we can output that as our index file. We'll run this script. It'll probably fail because it's on video. Oh, it didn't. Okay, great. And you can see that my beautiful index.html looks like this, right? And we created this whole website from PowerShell, from the console, using PSHTML. You can see that there's proof that I've done it live because this is the time right now, 14:28. And these are all the things we've learned, right? These are the forms that you've already seen. They all work. This is a proper, this is all running locally on my machine. But what we can also do is we can go in here and we'll say, refresh. These have all been modified. We'll add these changes. Nice changes. Whoa, baby. Nice live changes. Okay, and I'll push this off to GitHub. And while that's happening, we'll talk through why that's cool. And that is that when you create an Azure static web app, when you're going through the portal to create that, if you're not doing it with code, it will say, where's the code? Where's the source code for this web app? And if you say GitHub, it says, shall I create? Oh no, an emergency. His morning checks report just came in. It will say, okay, shall I create an action for you so that whenever you push to GitHub, we update the website? And it creates a GitHub action called Azure Static Web Apps Happy Mushroom and then a number, right? Because that was my random Azure Static app page. And basically any push to main, it will run this and basically deploy the code that I've specified. My app location is in the web folder. It's literally a static website. You just take those pages and copy them in, so there's no need to build anything. And then there's some conditional stuff. If it was a pull request, it closes the pull request. And if we head over to GitHub and we go to actions, we can see that nice live changes have already happened. It's already deployed while we were going through it. This laptop. And we can go into here and we can check it out, and it will say in the build and deploy step that it did exactly that, and that you can visit your site at Happy Mushroom, whatever. And if we click that, you can see that we're now on the internet. This beautiful website that we've created today is now live for everyone to enjoy. And all of the pages that we've built are on there as links also. Neat. So that was PSHTML with a little GitHub Actions, with a little DBA tools mixed in. Let's head back to this before. Cool. Like I said again, all of those demos are built within a dev container. You can go to my repo right here, Jess Pomfret PSHTML reports, and either run it in code spaces if you want in the browser, or you can download it to your local VS Code environment, spin up the dev container, and you can run through those examples without needing anything else installed because everything is defined within that dev container, which just makes developing PowerShell super easy. And like I said, me and Rob have a session tomorrow on how to set up dev containers and why they're so cool. If you want to know more about that. We've got slightly less than 15 minutes for questions and answers, but some time. So anyone have questions? Yeah. Three questions. All right, hit me.
Columns. So do you have any trick, like in order to show the whole column data? That's the first one.
Okay, let's go one question at a time because I'll forget. So the question is, like the styling of the tables wasn't great. The data wasn't all showing, or the columns wasn't all showing. That's all going to come down to like the CSS of how you style the HTML. So PSHTML is just going to worry about creating the HTML format, and the style you can apply with classes on any of the items. Like I showed it on the table. But you can do it on the lists, you can do it on paragraphs, wherever you can put a class in HTML, you can do it with PSHTML. And then it would just come down to the CSS code that's written. So, okay, second question.
The second question, I saw that you import the raw data.
Yes.
And export them.
Yes.
My question is, when it comes to reports, sometimes people want to see the created level.
Okay.
It's not like just raw data.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so the question is about my data sets were relatively simple and they were based off of live data sets, but what about aggregated data sets for things like data warehousing and more complex reporting, right? Was that summarized okay? Okay, basically, as long as you can get the data with PowerShell somehow, or you aggregate it in PowerShell, you can totally do that. So maybe the data is in Fabric, Microsoft Fabric, or a data warehouse or something. If there's a way to get that data to be a PowerShell object, then yeah, you can use it in this, no problem. It just depends on how you pull that down. So like my examples with DBA tools are just pulling data out of a SQL Server database. So if you have a ETL process that's running against SQL Server and doing that aggregations and putting it in a separate database, I could just pull that pre-aggregated data into PowerShell, create the reports, no problem. One thing I would think about on that is if you bring in a load of raw data and try and aggregate it in PowerShell, obviously that could be quite intense, like memory heavy, right? If we've pulled in a whole, I don't know, several gigs of data, like that's going to be hard to handle on PowerShell. So I'd probably say it needs to be pre-aggregated somewhere and you just pull in the data you need. Otherwise, it's going to slow down a bit. Great question.
Some of the transformation should happen before the PowerShell step.
So the question was that the transformation should happen before we get to PowerShell. I think so, in my opinion. Maybe it would be worth testing and seeing. I think it probably depends on how much data we're talking. Like, if we're talking about a small database, sure, pull it in, use group object in PowerShell. If we're talking about terabytes, I'd probably do it pre-PowerShell stuff.
So the last question.
Yes.
Can you go back to the database? Because maybe to pick the I didn't see it clearly, the credential mark.
Okay. Yeah.
So I also interested in
Okay, so like the question is around credentials connecting to the database. So for example, this get DBA database, the default credentials or the default authentication when I run that is going to use my Windows authentication. Like if I'm logged into my account as datamastermind/Jess Pomfret, that authentication is how I connect to the database. Now in this example, I'm running in a dev container and I'm using SQL authentication. So what I could do is I could say SQL credential, get credential, and it would do the pop-up and I'd put my passwords in. Or you could pass any way that you can save a credential, you could pass it in like that. For this example, I am using PS default parameter values because I'm running in a container and I always want to use that same credential to connect. And because this is a test environment, this is secure enough. I've basically created a PowerShell credential, which is this, right? And I've said using PS default parameter values. Does everyone know about those? Okay, one person. This is like a super cool trick. If you always want to pass in a parameter to any function, you can use PS default parameter values. And this is saying that any function that has DBA in the verb and SQL credential, actually it's not. It's saying any function that has DBA in the name, if there's a SQL credential parameter on it, pass in this credential. So I'm by default, this here is actually running SQL credential cred, but I'm passing it in as a default parameter value. So anytime, I don't need to specify this. It's just happening. So because this, I do need to specify the server. So this is super cool. If this is another thing that's worth looking up because it's, especially for connecting to containers or things where you need SQL credentials, this is super, super useful. Great questions. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
You used many JavaScript.
Yes.
When you're in a on-prem environment, you are not always allowed to go outside and take this script.
Yes, great question. So the question was, in my examples, I'm going out and I'm using these JavaScript libraries, and I'm pulling them down. Where does it go? I'm pulling them down from like a web source to use them locally. Yes, you can. And the question was, can I get them somewhere locally? And yes, you can source them locally. I don't exactly know how it would work for like deploying a web app because obviously they need to live in the same location, right? I guess you would just have them in like a source folder and specify that. But yes, you can either have the script written, is it in here, like this with content and then have the actual JavaScript within the code, or yes, you can specify either a link on the web or a relative path to pull that in. Yeah, great question. All right. Any other questions? No. Awesome. All right. We will go back to this, but presented. So it looks nice. The final ask is in the app. You can go to the app after the sessions have happened, and there is a rate this session box. If you love the session, 5 stars would be amazing. If you didn't love the session, whatever you think. But what's more important is there's a text box underneath. And if you could give me any feedback on why you liked the session or why you didn't like the session or how I can make it better, that would be much appreciated. So on that note, thanks for coming and I'll see you around. See you at the community dinner. Thank you.